This is the process of my picture called Hunter. I painted in oil on a primed masonite board, and I'm ultimately laying down my base colors. I'm using my midtones and trying to block out the scene. Now, one of the biggest things that I had issues with was as I started getting about halfway through the process, I just felt like it was lacking something. I'm putting in my darks, I'm putting in my lights, and I'm trying to make her skin tone like pop, and it's working. You know, her pose is fine, I feel, and I feel like the chair works well, but I felt like the surrounding area wasn't really very defined. And so one of my art friends basically said to me, hey, why don't you, clutter it up? Why don't you create it like our real world environments? And so at that point, I was like, okay, so I need to add in more stuff and put in more elements of what I'm ultimately doing. I really focus on her skin and her face, and I get her blocked out. And then what I do is I go through and I start adding these other elements. I'm adding in kind of my bright colors for my sword. I'm adding in, those windows, swords on the ground, masks, and things like that. And I'm ultimately just trying to force more elements of that process together. And so one of the big things that I was struggling with was, this is one of the most complex scenes I've done because of the amount of stuff in here. It's just not a rock background. It's not, something super easy to do like a sky or something like that. It's bottles, and I put a chicken wing in there, or chicken leg in the base there, and I started really kind of focusing on that. And then I'm building up my darks. I want my shadows in there. I want to make sure that her skin still pops. I want her skin to be pale, and I'm really focusing on elements like getting the details on this mask and getting those elements kind of put together and kind of blocked out. I'm putting things into walls where normally we wouldn't do it, but if you're a hunter or fighter, maybe you have a hole in a wall and maybe you're going to throw a dagger on it and hang something from it. So I just kind of started building this idea of the story of all the clutter that's around, and even like what you have for animals. So cats, I felt like a cat was very mystical being, especially with the Egyptian culture, and having that just being able to see the dead people or ghosts and spirits. And then I even put a cat with wings in there, and I just ultimately started blocking out these shapes, making them much more refined and defined. And it wasn't anything more than just doing one object at a time, or at least putting a block in at the time. And you can see here that I'm, designing the rug and putting in, French fries, and I'm putting in all this stuff. And at some point while you're working on this stuff, you can only go so small with the detail. So my goal wasn't to put all the detail in, but to give enough of the detail that I felt like it represented what I was trying to kind of achieve. Here I'm putting in little rings in the boots, working on brass knuckles, and, adding bindings on books, and adding in shadows on the cat, adding in a lot of layers and stuff like that. And sometimes, no matter how much you plan, what happens is you decide to make changes midway through. Like here I added in all this extra stuff, and I even went again, and I didn't like the way the window was being treated. So ultimately I went through and kind of worked on redoing the window. I ended up putting in a background scene so it gave me a little bit more depth into the window frame. And here you can see I've got like a spooky graveyard in the back and forest and things like that. So that adds a little bit more elements of design as well. Working in something urban like this where it's everything straight angles, I realized the importance of getting a straight edge and kind of painting along that straight edge. So a lot of the stuff that I painted was specifically like using rulers and things like that to kind of build it out. But ultimately it's just taking your time and doing one little detail at a time until you get ultimately what you're trying to go for. And I think it overall worked very well. I think that was a great thing. If you like this painting and you want to see more, support me by stopping in my Etsy store and liking and subscribing. Thanks much. And if you have questions, feel free to ask.